I do like 15 to 30 game jams a year since 2014. And I make a lot of weird, quirky indie games. Some are pretty experimental, some are just out there, but usually they're done really quickly because they're game jams. So it's like 48 hours, 72 hours, and I try to make them as polished as I can. And I have a lot of fun game jamming. And let's see, I got some slides and stuff. Yeah, this is a little show reel I made middle of last year. And that just goes through a bunch of different games and jams I've done. It's just a little 3-minute thing. So just a little bit more background on me. I started game development like in the 80s for fun as a kid because both my parents were mainframe programmers and they brought home an IBM XT PC. It was like 4.77 megahertz and had a 10 megabyte hard drive. And my mom spent 1 hour, taught me a little bit of basic, and that was all she ever taught me, but that was enough to get me started. And as a kid, I made a lot of games. Mostly were ASCII based because that's all we had back then. We didn't have graphics cards or anything. That was in the 80s, if you're wondering. And then I went to college. Oh, before that, so as a kid, I had to make a lot of games because we didn't really have like money to just buy games, or my parents wouldn't buy games for me. And there wasn't like an internet where you could just download free games from. So if I wanted to play something, I had to make it myself. Now, then in the 90s, I went to college, Carnegie Mellon, same as Chris. Oh, this game was a funny game. And so you can see the second half of this video, I just squeezed a whole bunch of things in because like I had to make it for a 3-minute show reel, and then halfway through I'm like, oh, I have like dozens and dozens more games to stick in here. How do I do it? So I just put a few seconds on a bunch of games. And some of this stuff is just or unfinished game jams with little pieces that are kind of cool. I think it's almost over. All right, that was a little show reel. So a lot of times I just take a little screenshot of my portfolio site. So the images are just from my portfolio site of a bunch of different games. So in the 80s, I made a lot of games. 90s, college, I studied computer science and cognitive science. And then I ended up, back then there were no game development courses. It was all like serious stuff, AI, databases, operating systems, all that stuff, algorithms. So nothing game development specific. And in college, I didn't do any game development. And after college, I went and got some boring software engineering jobs that paid well, because back then it was the late 90s tech boom, and companies would just roll out a red carpet for any college graduate with a computer science degree. They would fly you out, wine and dine you. But back then, there weren't really options for game development. You didn't see people graduate and go to game development. Or I never saw anybody who did that back then. Then came the 2000s. More really boring, soul-crushingly lack of meaning software engineering jobs, non-game development stuff. The thing that got me through was this game called Neverwinter Nights. It's like a D&D 3D game where you can, it had a great editor system where you can do this scripting in a C-like language. You can import 3D assets and stuff into it. You can make worlds and run basically Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. You can also host your own online servers using their engine. And that was amazing to me. Coming from that 1980s background doing like ASCII games, ASCII character-based graphics games. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I made this world called Abyss Layer 404. If any of you are familiar with like D&D's planes and planescape, it was this really weird and wacky world of stuff that was lost. Like where did that sock go that you lost in the wash? It went there. And there were people spending hundreds of hours playing this little world I made. And that was a really good feeling. And people really appreciating kind of this quirky style of game that I made. So I got kind of burnt out from doing all these software engineering jobs that really didn't have much meaning to me. They were challenging kind of technically. I was really good at them, but I was feeling like, why am I spending so much time doing this stuff that I don't really care about, working on these projects that allow no, I guess, creative expression? Natural gas pipeline measuring systems or billing systems for, this company or that company, or investment banking, hedging stuff. Because I'm not a very materialistic person. So I kind of felt burnt out by all that. And I moved to Hawaii and I kind of recovered a bit, a lot happier. So I spent like a year or two just surfing, building this world in Neverwinter Nights, telecommuting for my old job. They still wanted me. So I was able to just kind of work from Hawaii and just really recover a bit. But then I needed more money. So I got another boring software engineering job, non-game dev. 2008, I got married and decided to start my own projects and freelance work and just get out of that corporate life, because some people aren't really meant for that big company corporate life. And I still get nightmares about going to work in some big corporate office, and it's just awful to me. I mean, some of you guys might like it, or some of you guys might consider, doing your own freelance work and stuff, but you got to have at least some kind of nest or some savings to do that. So in the 2000s, I didn't do any game dev except for Neverwinter Nights, modding, basically. It wasn't until 2011 or 2012 when I saw the movie Indie Game Dev, the movie.
Indie Game, the movie. We had the executive producer as one of our speakers.
Cool. Yeah. I was kind of hyped from watching that. And I fell into the survivorship bias trap. I'll talk more about that later. And I'm glad you mentioned survivorship bias a little bit earlier in the meeting here. And I was doing mobile app development at the time, like non-game stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I should make a game. So I started playing around in iOS, making a game called Big Bot Smash. I had a publisher approach me and signed on with them. It was kind of a cool procedurally generated city smashing game that kind of had a little bit of AR aspect to it, in which you control the camera by tilting the screen. So you're basically having a window into this world, and the robot kind of moves away from you, whatever direction you're going. So it always looked kind of holographic. And I made that in 4 months, back when I didn't know any 3D modeling. So I did everything like by math and code. Like all the graphics were math and code, and it kind of looks like it because it's kind of blocky, but you learn a lot doing that. Like I had to make my own particle systems, like all the rendering stuff. There was this engine called Cocos 3D. It was still very primitive back then, nothing like Unity. If I were to try to make the same game today, I could probably do it in a week with Unity and what I know now. And I was kind of burnt out after that game because not because of how much work or crunch, it was more because the publisher and Apple, they take so much of a cut of any profits you make that it's like, is it even worthwhile continuing to do this? And so I set out to make my own games without a publisher. I was learning Unity and Blender through this site called CG Cookie, which has really nice, well-structured tutorials and things. And in 2014, I did my first game jam. I learned about Global Game Jam, and we had a meetup here in Honolulu. And we made this really awful game, but it was fun. It looked really horrible though, but it got me hooked. And so I found out about these online game jams because there were no other game jams that met in person anywhere in Hawaii. So I found out about online game jams, and back then they were a lot less frequent. They were kind of rare things. Today you got like dozens of games at any given moment. Back then there was like one at any given moment, if even. And there was this one series called the Arbitrary Game Jam that happened kind of monthly, where the winner of each month's game jam would host the next month's game jam. And that was so much fun because they're usually like 72 hours or 48 hours, but you can set the rules if you're hosting to whatever kind of weird rules within limits and have different constraints. And back then you couldn't like just put a game jam on Game Jolt or Itch. You had to actually make your own game jam site. And often the forums were on Reddit. So it was a much more involved ordeal. And jam hosts, like, they really cared about their jams a lot more. And they promoted it. So the first game jam that I did, like my first solo game jam, I won. I was like, hey, maybe this is something kind of fun. Don't get it too into winning game jams. I'll talk more about that later. That can really hurt your game jam career. And so since then, like I started basically a habit with the Arbitrary Game Jam of doing a game jam every month, maybe twice a month, and sometimes 3 times a month. And it kind of got bad a little bit. And from the game jams, I learned so much and was able to make more high polished little game experiences much faster and take some things out of those games, like different shaders I created. I made this UV free triplanar shader pack and sold it on the Unity asset store and made a bunch of money off of that just from this shader that I then documented and made a few different versions of, which was very useful for other developers. It wasn't until like maybe 2 years ago I finally made a game that I sold out of these jams, A Lullaby of Colors. It's a VR game, like a VR relaxation experience. Yeah, this was based off of somebody's cover art for a game by its cover jam, where you make a game based on, like, you pick, people make these fictional game covers or cartridges, and you make a game inspired by that cartridge. I sold that game first on Itch, and then it was my first Steam, and also HTC 5 port for VR, and it turned out all right. And since then, I've been making a lot more VR games because I think it's still such a new field and there's so many interesting things to do. And so this year, I've been doing way too many game jams. I think I've done like 15 already this year and have about 3 more to go. I've been doing a little bit less freelancing, or a lot less because of the pandemic. Here in Hawaii, a lot of the business is tourism driven, and my clients have to cut back on their costs a lot. So they're kind of freezing a lot of projects, which gives me more time to work on my own projects and to jam more. So there's 2 games I'm working on. One is called Forest Hiking VR. It's a VR game where you get to just hike with people online. So because of the pandemic, I haven't been going outside much, like maybe once every month or 2 or 3, because I get everything through delivery. I miss the forests and outdoors and nature a lot. And I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice to just go for a hike? Just call someone up, hey, you want to go for a hike in VR? Especially like if I want to hike with my dad or something who's in New Jersey, I thought it'd be just nice to have a relaxing experience. Go for a hike. There's a voice chat in it. There's another game I've been working on since the end of last year called Kaiju Cake Bake Off. It's one where you bake giant cakes for giant monsters, and the fate of humanity depends on it if we get some time. But you can always check my portfolio site. Actually, they're not on my portfolio site yet. I haven't been getting much progress on those games because I do too many game jams, and that's kind of a problem. Now, I want to go over some lessons learned and some interesting tidbits I acquired from just doing all these game jams. I've done about 2 years ago, I think I reached my 100 game mark. I lost count, but I might be at like 120, 130, something around there. So I'm going to share a bunch of lessons learned and things I discovered from doing all these game jams. Something to keep in mind is survivorship bias. It's the act of focusing on successful people, businesses, strategies, and overlooking those that failed, typically because of their lack of visibility. So like Indie Game, the movie, it focused on these people who made it. But for each one of them, there are like hundreds of people who maybe did the same exact thing, but failed. So you got to always keep that in mind whenever you hear talks from people. So things that work for me may not work for you, but there are things you might want to just try out, or like try on as a suit. Does it fit you? Does it feel comfortable? Does it work for you? If not, keep looking for other strategies. Yeah, just take whatever I say with a little grain of salt here. Getting the most out of a jam. I think one good way is to have goals. So before a jam, list out possible goals. Might be something technical, like this past jam I wanted to learn this new feature in Unity that I haven't used yet. I've only heard about it. So I use that jam as an opportunity or a motivated excuse to learn that feature and get some practice in it. You can also use it as a specific tool you want to practice. Let's say you want to learn how to use Blender or Substance Painter better. List that out so you can do that during the jam and kind of focus on that goal. Or you might want to practice a new artistic style or want to practice healthy habits. Lately, I've been trying to do that. Get 9 hours of sleep for a jam every night. And so the past jam, I had like 9 or 10 hours of sleep every night. And I just like slept in. So that could be something you want to practice if you weren't practicing very healthy habits before. Or one good one is to work better in a team, which you guys are probably practicing right now with HomeTeam GameDev. After the theme is announced, you can use these goals to constrain that theme. Like the more constraints you have on a theme, the easier it is to come up with something and not just have this blank page feeling of getting stuck or having too many ideas and you can't pick one. Well, having these constraints really help, as does maybe if you're doing two jams at once, like the overlap between them, that little period of time, you'll have different themes from these different jams. And doing those at the same time really helps to constrain that and maybe come up with something kind of novel or inspired or unthought of before. Back in the Arbitrary Game Jam, they give you three themes. Like two of them are just randomly selected words, and one is picked by the host. And you can do any combination of those three themes. And sometimes there's even a bonus theme. And having those weird themes that don't necessarily go together helps you to come up with something more creative and original that no one would have thought of. And so the other point is, after the jam, then you can use those goals that you picked out for that specific jam as a criteria for success. Like, oh, did I, maybe practice that new artistic style I was going for? Or did I try out that technical skill, and what did I learn from that? We'll get into more of that later. My secret to an enjoyable and prosperous game jam career, if you can call it a career, is not to put too much weight in game jam ratings and rankings. So in my early days of game jamming, since I won that first solo game jam, I'm like, okay, that was cool. Can I win more? I'm actually a contender. But that was not healthy. Because when I didn't win a jam or I didn't place very well in a jam, then I was like, oh man, this sucks. And I overlook all the good stuff I get out of a jam. So I came up with a new scoring system of like how well you really did during a jam. One is, how much fun did you have? And I often tell people about this scoring system, like in the Discords, because I always notice there's always some jammer or other that after the jam, they're really dissatisfied with how they ranked or what their score was. But keep in mind, these scores are so subjective, especially ones where people rank each other or rate each other, because you might not have people rating your game, and that'll like really lower the weight of your game in terms of it'll like down weight your ranking or your scores. Let's say it's a judge jam where a judge basically assigns who wins, who loses. That is totally subjective. Like you might make a platformer, but they like story games or whatnot. Sometimes I make VR games knowing very few people will probably have a VR headset in the jam to play, and the game has like no ratings, and so it doesn't really place. You want to focus on your real game jam score, which is how much fun did you have, what skills did you level up on, what did you learn. Now that is really important. If you really look at how much you improve just from doing a game jam, how much more confidence you've gained from doing that 48 72 hour game jam, you'll see that it's actually quite a lot. Another biggie is growing. What did you discover about yourself? And how much did you challenge yourself? That will definitely vary for everybody, but for me, that was a huge thing. I use game jams more as a learning experience now. Your first few game jams might be about just finishing a game in time, just trying to finish that game. And that is the challenge. So after you've done a few of those, you'll find, okay, you can definitely finish a game. How do you want to push yourself? How do you want to grow yourself? Do you want to add more? Do you want to do more polish? The times I don't feel good about a game jam are when I made a game that was too easy for me to make, that didn't really push myself, that I thought, I could have done that years ago. That game, it didn't really push me to use my new skills or my new abilities that I've gained through the years. I mean, sure, you can always do a game jam just for fun, just to create something and put it out there. But it always helps your long-term path if you make one that really pushes and challenges yourself. And another aspect is the people. Did you make any friends along the way? Did you encourage or help other people? Did you add value to the jam experience for others? Most of my best friends on Twitter and online are people I met through game jams or through the game jam kind of culture, like with the YouTubers, journalists, people who play these game jam games or are interested in what kind of weird, wacky, experimental stuff are produced from these games. And that really helps because I see, okay, oh, my friend is doing that jam or this jam, and I really want to see what they make this time. Just like they want to see what I make this time or for my next game, because with game jams, you really don't know what you're going to make. You can't predict, oh, is this person going to make this type of game or that type of game, that type, until you see the theme. It's just an unpredictable delight. And just delight in other jammers and in what you're going to make in your future jams, and help and support and encourage each other. And you also learn so much from being on a game jam team and seeing how other people work, how they handle that really tight, impossible deadline. The other one, this one's kind of a new one, is health. How was your healthy game jam hygiene? Did you take breaks, sleep, hydration, stretching, healthy food, limit caffeine and chemicals? This one is actually very important if you want to have a long game jam career. There was this year I did like 30 game jams in 1 year, and that was so unhealthy because back then I had energy drinks. I didn't really take breaks. Well, didn't take breaks as I still don't take breaks that much, but I try to do it better now. And I really hurt my health. And I'm still paying for that today with some chronic injuries and pain. And so you want to really watch out for that because jamming, it takes the same stresses on you as crunching. And you really want to watch out. Take a lot of rest after a jam. Like because I'm a freelance guy and I set my own schedule mostly, I normally take a whole entire day after a jam to just rest and recover and just not work on anything. And I have that luxury. A lot of people don't. So you may want to really pace yourself. These 5 tips, after you do a game jam, just look at them and see how you can grow and how you can grow even more and up these scores, like with your personal best. Okay, next. Game jams are like improv comedy. I've listened to the HomeTeam GameDev podcast before, and I've heard you guys talk about this before also. Okay, so first an anecdote. So back in my younger days, I took this improv comedy class. And I know Chris has done something like that too. And on the podcast, I've seen that some of you other guys have done it too. Because I wasn't talking very much. I still don't talk much. And I had to take an improv comedy class to kind of talk more and be able to interact with people more. And it was the funnest thing I've ever done. Like I laugh so hard during those classes, and whenever I go to improv comedy show, I laugh so hard. It's just, I get an ab workout doing that. But improv comedy, like in that class, there was another student who was also taking improv comedy and also taking a stand-up comedy class. And he said, man, in our improv comedy classes, we get people to laugh, like uproarious laughter so easily. Like, and we haven't even, we haven't planned anything out. We don't know what we're going to do in 3 seconds, but we get them to laugh so easily. And he said, but in my stand-up class, like we got to come up with a whole routine. We got to practice so hard, rehearse it, test it out. and then we might get some people to laugh. And it seems so different. But here's the thing, with improv comedy, when you're doing it and you're practicing it, you actually practice a lot of exercises, so you get those general skills. Like you might be trying to come up with, how many people does it take to screw in a light bulb jokes, and you just got to keep coming up with them nonstop off the bat. Or you want to come up with words that rhyme alphabetically. Like that might be an exercise. So you keep doing that and you practice that. Or you might try coming up with a musical or a limerick or this and that. So it helps to sharpen your mind for those more general skills. So during that improv time, you can just come up with it more quickly, even though you haven't practiced whatever you're going to come up with, like that specific thing. So the same thing is with game jams. You're practicing with these little, short little jams. Let's say 3D modeling, or making music really quickly, or whatever you're going to do, or programming. And you can come up with something nice that looks really cool, that plays well with just that little bit of effort. Whereas outside of a game jam, you might take weeks, months to do the same thing. Normal game development, that's more like making a play, making a Broadway musical. You really rehearse it, you really polish it. Everything behind the scenes is, you want to make it awesome. You want to avoid technical debt, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more later. Whereas game jams, you're doing this quick thing. And I really enjoy getting that quick outcome of creativity from these jams. And there's also a trap you could fall into. And I know that Chris has talked about this a lot before, which is just falling into this. If you do too many jams, you could get yourself into just doing really short projects or having really bad habits for long projects. So that's something you definitely got to watch out for. Let me get onto the next slide here. Let me